In this video, I will be running through how to create additional objects within Illustrator, focusing on both open objects and closed objects. Before I get started, I want to point out that within my interface, my artboard is a little bit on the small side. Okay, it's sitting at a 50% zoom, and I just can see a lot of this additional workspace around my artboard. Some people call this the paste board. I don't need to see quite as much of that. I want as much of my artboard present. So I'm going to go up to my view menu. And if you recall from Photoshop, the same options exist here in Illustrator. So you can zoom in and zoom out manually. You also have options like fit your artboard in the window, which is what I'm going to use right now. And the keyboard shortcut is Command 0 because I'm on a Mac. If you're on a PC, it's Control 0. And what that does when I use that is it makes the artboard as large as it can possibly be while retaining the boundaries. So nothing is floating outside of my view. And that zoom ends up being 65.16%. Okay, so I wouldn't have known what percentage I would need to set that to. So that's, again, it's a really handy shortcut that you can use when you just want your artboard as large as you can possibly get it. Now, I want to use this artboard to start adding some additional objects. And so far we've done our arrows, we've talked about these selection tools. We will get to the pen tool. Okay, I'm going to save that for just a little bit later. And below your pen tool, you're going to see something called your line segment tool. Again, if you see this little arrow, okay, it's going to indicate that there are more tools available to you. And so you're just going to need to long press to get to them, just like you did when we used our shape tools. And something that I have not introduced yet is that within Illustrator, if there are multiple tools, you're going to see that there's an additional little arrow here, and it's a button. And I can click that, oops, and that will give me a tearaway menu. Okay, so same thing could be done here with our shapes. Okay, so this is something that's just really handy, in particular if you're working on creating prints or patterns, if you're working on logos, which are typically made of simple shapes. Sometimes it's just handier to have these readily accessible so you don't have to continue to make these long presses. Now, I'm not using shapes today since we've already run through shapes, but I am going to run through these options. And so I've got a line segment, I've got an arc, there's a spiral, and an assortment of grids. And to use these, because these are lines, they're not closed objects, they're just open objects, open paths, you need to make sure that you have a color set on your stroke, because that's going to be what puts color on this. And so here you'll see I don't have a fill. Again, if you have a fill and you need to get rid of it, you can hit this little button here for none. And then my stroke has a color associated with it. And so to use this, I'm going to use the line segment tool first. I'm just going to click and drag, click and drag, click and drag. And so I can make longer ones and teeny tiny ones. I can run in any direction I want to. Okay, so I'm just quickly creating sort of a little pattern here. The next option I have here is the arc tool. And the arc tool, same thing, I'm just going to click and drag. And you're going to see that when you begin, you can go in either direction. Okay, I haven't let go of my mouse, so I can decide which direction this needs to flow. And if I hold my shift key, it'll retain the proportions of an arc. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and let that one go. I'll go in a different direction. Okay, and again, I'll hold shift on some of these to make sure I've got a better curve. Some I'll leave a little bit shallow. Okay, and again, I've just created a little pattern playing with these arcs going in different directions, different sizes. Okay, again, we're going to be spending a lot of time on pattern creation this semester, so any chance you get to sort of play with pattern or print creation, please take an opportunity to do that so you can get a sense of what you like. The other options here are really sort of specialized. If you use the spiral, okay, you'll see obviously that's what a spiral looks like. And much like the shape tools, if I hold this and use my arrow keys, you'll see that I can make this a less complex spiral. okay? Or I can make it a much more complex one. And that was just using my up and down arrows. Now, I don't want to keep those, so I'm just going to do a marquee selection with my black arrow and hit delete. And I'll move on to my grid. I'll drag that out. You'll see what that looks like when I release it. But I'm going to go ahead and draw another one, and I'm going to hold my mouse. And because this is made up of rows and columns, I can use a combination of up and down to designate how many rows I need. And then I can use left and right to add or subtract columns. All right, so if you were creating a checkerboard, you might find this really handy. Okay, so that's something that you can certainly play with. I very rarely have occasion to use that. And then the last one is the polar grid. Same thing, I'm going to release the first one so you can see it. The second one I'm going to hold, and you'll see if I use up and down, I can control the number of rings, and left and right, okay, we'll cut this into essentially pieces of pie. All right, so that's something that you can use as well. So, you know, really at the end of the day, you're probably going to have lots of different ideas that come to you for things that you might do with these tools. I very rarely use the grids. The exception being I'll use the polar grid to create rainbows. There are other tools that you can use to slice off half of this and make each of these individually closed objects and fill them with color. It's a great way to get a really uniform looking rainbow. Again, just using a tool that exists and modifying it as needed. I'm going to go ahead and delete those. Okay, and again, these are all tools that are referred to as being open paths, and they rely on strokes to render color to them. If you move one tool down and you long press, because it's probably going to default to your paintbrush. We're not going to talk about your paintbrush today, but we will talk about your blob brush tool. And this is a really useful tool again for essentially doing some drawing. If I want to sort of freeform some sprinkles, I can do that. I can also draw a circle. Okay, essentially I can draw whatever I want, of course. I can try to close that. Okay. So again, something that you may find useful. And then finally, if you move to the left, okay, you're going to need to long press here, and you're going to see a pencil tool and a smooth tool. Okay, we're going to use both of those today. And to start with, I'm going to grab the pencil tool. And this, much like the blob tool, which is creating a really sort of heavy weighted filled object, the pencil tool is drawing. Okay, and so again, I'm just going to freeform it. I'll make more sort of curves here. Again, creating a few little short ones, some longer ones. Okay. Create a couple maybe that are not so cute, so we have a few things to fix. Okay. So again, all things that you can use to create patterns, to draw, to fill things with. And then finally, the last tool I want to cover here, again, was under your pencil tool. You've got a long press, and I want you to grab your smooth tool. Now this is a tool that you can use to make some corrections. So if I zoom in manually, I'm just using Command plus on my keyboard. If I come back and look at a couple shapes, okay, so you'll see that when I used my blob tool, it automatically smoothed, and these little sort of sprinkly things that I created look good. I actually kind of like the way this one looks. It looks hand-drawn. I don't mind that one, but this one I'm not loving. And so what I can do is I've got to first make sure it's selected. And if I zoom in a little bit more to it, you're going to see that this is made up of a closed path on the inside and a closed path on the outside. So again, I'm going to make sure that the inner one is selected, and I'll go back and grab my smooth tool. And what I can do is come in and smooth over those anchors, and you'll see it actually deleted one of them. And now I've got a smoother transition, okay? And I'll do the same thing out here. Again, I've got to make sure it's selected. I'll grab my smooth tool again. And I'm just going to draw over that anchor. And perhaps I like that, perhaps I don't. I'll try to smooth out a little bit more. Okay, and you can see the change that's happening there, right? So that was with my blob tool. I'm going to come over to the pencil tool, and again, using my black arrow to select this to make sure it's active, and then come back with my smoothing tool. I can come in and try to smooth some of those points. And as I do that, you'll see the point is disappearing and it's becoming more curved. Okay. And this is really just something that you've got to play with. It depends on the way you've drawn your open or closed shape. And it's really just your hand sort of playing with this and getting it to where you want it. So now I've got a much better transition and these look smooth. I'll do it one more time on this open path. And again, I've got these points, so I'm just going to sort of draw over them. Sometimes it takes a couple passes. Okay, sometimes it's great to sort of like run underneath it, but sometimes that doesn't work, and I find it's a little bit easier to simply draw over the anchor itself. More often than not, this sort of technique works better if there are a couple of anchors in that area. When I get to where there's one singular anchor, it tends to work better to simply draw over that particular anchor, the singular one. Okay, and so if I zoom back out, you'll see now that these look much smoother. Okay, and much more in line with the other hand-drawn shapes that I created. Okay, so one more time, I'm going to go ahead and reset my artboard using the keyboard shortcut Command or Control 0. Again, that brings my artboard to the largest version that can fit in my interface. Again, that is under View and Fit Artboard in the window. Okay. And again, in this tutorial, I went through the line segment tools. I went through the blob brush tool. I also went through your pencil tool and your smooth tool.